Eva was born and raised in Estonia in the former Soviet Union. For those of you who don't know anything about Estonia, which I didn't, it's situated in Northern Europe along the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. As you may know, it was formerly part of the Soviet Union, as I said. To the south is Latvia, where my grandmother and my mother was born and escaped the Cossacks, the big story of my life, with my grandparents when she was a year old, but this is not about me. Eva came to the United States to continue her studies in history, her main field of research being the history of conflict of various ideologies. Having grown up in the former Soviet Union, an empire built and governed with conflict and fear, she has always had a keen interest and passion for her subject. Eva is the director of training for Coldwell Banker Legacy, the largest real estate brokerage in New Mexico, where she lives. She speaks and trains on the topics of conflict, de-escalation, effective communications, and negotiation. I know Derek will be sitting up and paying attention today. Eva has presented for realtors, politicians, business owners, and educators, and is a member of NSA New Mexico, where Patricia and I have been attending a lot of meetings lately. Today, you're going to learn about the most overlooked aspect when it comes to negotiating with others. In any negotiation or conflict, there are 4 levels of communicators. Have you ever wondered which you are and how it affects the others around you? Well, stay tuned to find out. Please help me welcome Eva Fanari.
Thank you so much, Janice. Can everybody hear me well? Yeah. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. The craziest real estate deal, and I'm a real estate broker. We have a couple of real estate people in here as well, but bear with me if you're not in real estate. But the craziest real estate deal I've ever had was in August 2015. I had been a real estate broker a little bit over 2 years. The sellers and buyers went under contract at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and by 4 o'clock on that very afternoon, everybody had lawyered up. The parties hadn't even seen each other. They had never spoken to each other. And 10 days later, police had to be called to the plumbing inspection. Almost every real estate broker out there has their own horror story, how negotiating and communicating goes terribly wrong. And if they don't have it, they haven't been in the business long enough. So if you ever talk to one and ask, most of you are not real estate brokers, but there's a really good chance that you have your communication horror story of your own. Maybe it's business related, something that happened with a colleague at work, maybe from your friends or even neighbors. And if all these aspects have failed to give you a great story, then I'm pretty sure that your family members have filled that blank in your life. I invite you to keep, at this point, a story from your own life on top of mine as we move forward with this session today, and let's see if you can gain some clarity about yourself and about the people involved in that story. But coming back to my story, the question is, what happened and how did it happen? When I got into real estate, and well before that, I had gone to every negotiation training I could find. I read many, many books on how to be a better negotiator, and I knew all about gathering information, observing, asking the right questions, the PETNA, ZOPA, reservation value, 10 steps, 5 steps, 7 steps. And they are all really great tools that I learned. And then I also read books galore, communicating how to read people, the elements of communication, you know, the words you use, the body language, the tone of voice, and yet still somehow something went wrong on that Saturday. Somehow all of I had learned had failed. And there's a pretty easy and simple answer to this if I wrap it all kind of together. And that answer is that humans were involved, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But what you are going to hear today is based on my personal experience, my observations as a real estate broker after being in the business for nearly 10 years. I have observed and interviewed other brokers, other real estate professionals, and I have trained and assisted hundreds of other realtors. And So you're going to hear today an amalgamation of what I've learned with different personality types and different conflict management and communication styles. So just so you know where this material is coming from. What I have learned and observed is that there are 4 levels of negotiators and communicators out there. And I put negotiation and communication under the same umbrella here because I find it very curious how trying to get an agreement about a price for a professional services is considered a negotiation. But trying to get a person in the next cubicle to wear less perfume or your spouse to agree to vacuum is considered just communicating. So negotiating and communicating are sort of really tied together. We are constantly negotiating, we are constantly communicating, and we are constantly doing it in 3 different categories: with others, with self, and with the environment as well. Others, it's pretty clear. That's how we mostly understand communicating and negotiating. There has to be someone else involved. But we also communicate with ourselves. Your alarm goes off in the morning, and now you're negotiating with yourself. Am I going to press the snooze button? For how long? Am I going to get out of the bed? What's going to be my next step? And when it comes to the environment, then we also constantly negotiate with the environment around us as well. This past weekend, there was a bicycle race in France from Paris to Nice, and one of the riders in a hairpin curve got a flat tire because his speed was too high. And the sports commentator said this, it was brilliant. Looks like he tried to negotiate that curve and it didn't go the way he had hoped. So yes, his BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement, and ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement, and reservation value, or I know Derek calls it the walkaway value, they all got rejected by the curve. So we're constantly in communication with the world around us, others around us, and with ourselves. So trying to get to 4 levels of communicators. And just to give you a quick heads up, there are no good or bad ways of communicating. None of these levels are bad, and we'll go through those one by one so you'll understand what I'm talking about. Let's see. Okay. So 4 levels of negotiation, or negotiators or communicators. Let's start with the first one. Your first level of communicators or negotiators are your instigators. And these individuals, they run with drama. They criticize, they play devil's advocate, they assume the worst in people. They have a tendency to blame easily. They can be passive, they can be passive aggressive, they can be aggressive, it doesn't really matter. But in general, taking responsibility for their part in a conflict or mistake is usually difficult or impossible for them. And there's very little self-reflection with these characters. Here's the trick, though. It's easy to judge those people, but we can all be those people at some point or another. When something challenging happens in our lives, we often turn into a person who has a hard time managing their own feelings, even if we try really hard. And I'll give you an example. Several years ago, when my father passed away, I was just an angry person. That pain demands to be felt. And if we don't actively deal and work through our underlying issues, then it's going to leak out one way or another. And sometimes this level can be situational as well. You may be a brilliant and wonderful and highest level of negotiator at work, but in your family life, you may be the instigator in general, who runs with a lot of drama. Then the level up from instigators are the reactionaries. And they are not the ones to be the first to hit or bring the drama, but they don't instigate drama because they have learned to manage their feelings enough that they have good filter when it comes to blurting out whatever comes to mind, unless they get triggered. This is the key word here. I discussed this topic with somebody at work, and he, a great negotiator, but it was interesting. He said, well, I'm a really great conflict manager and I'm a great negotiator unless somebody upsets me. But most of us can be really nice people, right? Great socializers until somebody upsets us or triggers us. And Level 2, reactionaries. This is where your majority of the population is in. Most people are reactive. They are happy to live their lives until somebody crosses them. You see it in the traffic, you see it in the grocery stores, you see it in negotiating as well, and especially in workspaces. Sometimes in negotiating world, you hear this phrase that don't be reactive, be responsive. Have you heard that? Throw yes in the chat for me if you have ever heard that, you shouldn't be reactive, you should always be responsive. Go with response. Put just yes in the chat for me so I know that somebody here has heard this. Yes, Tim says yes. Tim is the only one. Perhaps nobody else has heard this before. Patricia, you have heard it. Never heard it. Janice. All right, so let's talk about it, because Janice, you will hear this at some point. Don't react to people, respond to people. It's quite self-explanatory when I say it like this, but this whole statement that don't react, but respond from a calm place has a very powerful challenger. And that challenger is the human ego. So what I have seen and I have observed when people talk about their own reactivity is that no, I responded in a very reactive manner. Two different things. Did you see what happened here? We are smart. Never underestimate the cunning and cleverness of the human ego. So be careful when you hear somebody saying, you shouldn't be reacting, you should be responding, because we can easily talk ourselves into responding in a reactive manner, and we still think we have done the right thing. Let's move to the next level. Bystanders. Now, the bystanders, these people have taken their emotional development to the next level. They have learned to master their own emotions, and they have a very good grasp of their own triggers. They don't bring drama. They do not engage in it when it's thrown upon them. And therefore, they sort of stand by. They stay out of it. Sometimes, let's say if you have a holiday dinner with your family, you don't see a whole lot. This may actually be your best way to go about it. But these are your bystanders. They don't engage. And when I come back to my story in a little bit, I'll see why this can actually, you will see why this can actually backfire. Because we often think that if I stay out of it, I don't engage, I have done my best in the situation. But for you to actually have thriving relationships and for you to be representing yourself, your business, and your clients in an optimal way, you need to take it to the next level. And you don't really see many people on this level because it requires skill and discipline to get to level 4. This is our highest level of negotiators, and they are de-escalators. They don't bring drama, they don't react, and they don't just disengage and allow others to feel whatever they are feeling. They will actively de-escalate the situation. If the client is upset, they will assist them to mitigate their emotions, because they are very full aware that if the people around them are affected in a negative way, it will affect them as well. This understanding of how human relations work is crucial for you to be successful in communicating and negotiating. I'll give you an example. In real estate, if my cooperating broker, meaning that let's say I represent the seller and the other broker represents the buyer, if the buyer broker or the other broker is upset, it affects my client as well, because it affects the other broker, affects their client. The drama will spill over, and whatever the decisions come from the other side affect my client as well. Therefore, they affect me as well. So you have to be constantly on your toes to make sure that you help de-escalate the emotions and feelings of other people around you. I hope this makes sense to you. When we talk about these levels here, it's easy to move down. You can easily become from de-escalator to a bystander to a reactionary to an instigator. It is harder to climb up. It's sort of like going up and down the mountain. it's a little bit easier to let yourself go and you're going to just roll down the mountain. It takes more effort, focus, and intention to make your way up the mountain. So when we come back to my story, where people were lawyered up 5 hours into the transaction, never even seen each other, never heard of each other, never exchanged any words, and where police had to be called to a plumbing inspection. How crazy is this? Then here's what happened. Let's look at this ladder here, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. There was a lot going on. I was representing the seller, and on the other side, a lot was going on in that camp. Some of them were instigators and some of them were reactionaries. I had been in the business for a little bit over 2 years, and I thought that the highest level for me to be was a bystander. I'm just going to stay out of it altogether. And it started escalating, and I wasn't paying attention to my clients as well. So me relaying information coming from the other camp to my client escalated everybody into a situation where they were all lawyered up. And when the trust is broken, and instead of actively de-escalating both parties, I raised my hands and stood aside. And therefore, it got very confrontational during the plumbing inspection, and police had to be called in to mitigate the situation. So the de-escalator at that point had to be the uniform of a police officer. So let me ask you this now. Would you be open to hearing a few tips how to become a de-escalator? What would it take for you to become a de-escalator? Again, okay, Greg says, Greg is with me. So anybody else? Is Patricia is with me? Thank you so much. Anybody else? Nod your heads. Tim is saying yes. Pete, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and take a look. So my first tip, I have 3 tips for you. I have many, many more tips, but let's start with 3 and let's see where it takes us from there. Janice, am I good on time? I see I have about 4 minutes.
You're good. You're good. You don't have to worry so much. We're basically here till 9. You don't have to stop right at 8:30. You're okay.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So tip 1, you have to accept the fact that people are unpredictable and they are unreadable. Most negotiation and communication books will tell you how to read and figure out other people. And somehow as a society, we have landed in a place when we are constantly trying to diagnose other people. Well, I know what happened to this bit. That's why they are this way. And this person has this ailment, and this person, I don't have a single divorced girlfriend whose ex-husband is not a psychopath, a sociopath, a narcissist, or a combination of the 3 of those, because we are trying to figure out other people, and it's one of the hardest tasks to do. Unless you have a license and you get paid to sit down with somebody week after week, hour after hour, every week to try to figure out what's their deal, don't even give it a shot. Don't put your focus or intention into it. Accept the fact that people are unpredictable and unreadable. That's just how it is. You have to go into any communication, even with people who you know really well, that there may be issues that you have never been privy to. You don't know what's going on. I quickly want to give a demonstration why specifically that is. When we talk about communication, I think most of you here are familiar with the 3 elements of communication, because it goes through most classes already at the university level. It goes through different seminars. I have heard it in NSA many times. And those are your words that are spoken. Then we have the tone of voice. And then, of course, we have the body language. The challenge with this is that sometimes communication happens when words are not involved. Sometimes we don't hear the tone of voice, and sometimes we can't see a body language. Let's say we are over the phone with somebody, which happens in a lot of negotiation and communicating with in a business setting with clients. Maybe if you're a speaker and you are negotiating over the phone with an HR person who's about to hire you, there is a lot of information that you necessarily can't get. And even if you can get information from all of those, it can be a little bit tricky, especially number 3. I have paid close attention to this one, how we read the body language just fine. Most of us are really good at reading it. We understand when somebody is upset. The challenge is that we usually, and that's my observation, and that's the feedback I have received throughout my seminars that I've been doing for over 5 years. I do 3 public seminars here in Albuquerque. We misinterpret why somebody is upset. So trust yourself knowing that, yes, something is happening in somebody's energetic space. Don't really necessarily trust yourself thinking that you know why they're upset. And this is one of the most common issues I hear from people. A quick example, a lady was in a family gathering and the room was really cold. So at the end of it, one of her family members, over 50 people there, was asking her, why were you so upset the whole time? And she's like, I wasn't upset, I was just really cold. So our body expresses dissatisfaction or when our needs are not met in a specific way, but why specifically we express that is up in the air. Let me tell you, it's up in the air. But it's fair to say that, yes, you know when somebody is not 100% okay, but make sure not to jump into conclusions about them. It, in general, comes across as offensive to people. Or another great one, which is really applicable in today's world as well, because we are on Zoom a lot. One lady who is the director of a program here in Albuquerque who helps families with really young kids who struggle with domestic violence and abuse. And she got feedback over and over from her audience that she comes across as she's upset all the time, or like, irritated or angry. That was the word used. And it was just her natural state. You didn't see this, that her face looked angry until we went to Zoom and things started to be recorded. And she's like, oh my God, I have to make a mental note that I smile because I have, for some reason, an angry face when I speak. And she's never angry. So you have to be aware of that as well. But let's talk about the communication, why we can't just rely on words, tone of voice, and body language, because there are really 7 elements of communication. So the first 3 we spoke about, and then the underlying elements that often are not even mentioned in communication seminars, workbooks, and so on. So the 4th one would be somebody's internal dialogue. I can be sitting happily here and having a conversation, but maybe I remembered that argument that I had with my spouse in the middle of the breakfast. And if it all of a sudden pops into my head, it actually affects how I talk and what my body language may be. It may have nothing to do with the other party, but it popped into my head. Then the next one would be emotional experience in general in life. There could be a trigger about you that affects the person across you and really doesn't have anything to do with you, but something that comes from past. I mean, number 6, your body experience in that very moment. Remember, I shared about a woman who was just cold. She was cold in that space, and she came across as she was upset at everybody, at her family, at that gathering. And then we have the last one, our personal, psychological, social, mystical, and cultural conditioning. This is huge. This is huge. Janice, you were talking just on Monday at Derek's seminar or podcast, how the way your parents have taught you has really affected how you see other people around you as well. And it's definitely true. I think it's a little bit easier to read Europeans. And I don't know if it's my cultural conditioning, but it's easier for me in that cultural space to read and understand how people are feeling or what they're trying to say or what their needs are. But Americans are really good at hiding what's going underneath. They are really good at it. And I'll just give you a quick example. Last week, I was training a group of 15 brokers. They were all women. We were talking about a difficult transaction, and I invited them to see this through compassion, because even though people lash out and maybe they're on level 1 and they bring all the drama to the table, don't fully know why they are doing it, why they are behaving this way. And so I told to the whole class at 9 o'clock in the morning, listen, when I come to the class every morning, I don't know what you have had to go through just to get to this chair today in the morning. You have things that are happening in your life and experiences that nobody else knows. And to my surprise, I had 4 people, 4 ladies in that class who looked totally happy, made up, beautiful, ready for the day. 4 ladies started crying for just that comment. You know, not like out loud, but they were just wiping the tears. So something, it's safe to assume that something, like everybody around you is going through something, and how it's affecting them on that very morning, we have really no way of knowing. By the time we're 30 years old, most of us have become masters at hiding the underlying currents. We show up to the world and we try not to place our pain and burden on other people and carry it alone. And it's a safe bet to guess that that may be happening for people as well. Which takes me to second tip. This one is relatively new in my world, just a couple of years old, but just because you had a thought doesn't mean that it's the truth. We have, many of us, and I don't think all of us, but many of us think that if I'm thinking or feeling a certain way, it must be the truth. That whole feeling comes from the very survival instinct that we all have in us. If something is rubbing us the wrong way, we need to stay away from it. But turns out your thoughts are not the best litmus test to find out what's true and what's not in this world. This is something, again, you need to make your own. You have to sit with this thought and you have to observe what's going on in your thoughts. It sort of ties to tip number 1, that people are unpredictable and unreadable. So if you do think you have figured somebody out, put a question mark next to your thought, because it may not be so. And last tip for you today, tip number 3, is pause. Pause is often mentioned in the speaking world. It's often mentioned in communication and negotiation. Perhaps you have heard the acronym WAIT, and it stands for why am I talking? That's not what I mean here. There's a better one that I like. What am I thinking? Because remember those communication, those other 4 communication elements. What am I thinking before you talk? That's a good one. That's also not what I'm talking about. But when you are communicating with someone, especially if the emotions start getting more intense, always right before you make a decision that you are going to speak, and before you actually speak, there is a space there. And I invite you to catch yourself in that space. I'm not asking you to think something or try to remember that WAIT or acronym. Just take another breath there and stay quiet. That's it. It's one of the most miraculous parts of life when you catch yourself before you speak and you just don't say anything. The other party most likely is expecting you at that point to say something as well. And just be quiet. If you're on the phone and you can't nod your head to let the other person know that you're still listening, say it out. Say, I'm listening on the phone. And isn't that interesting that sometimes when somebody is nodding their head on the phone, you can hear them nodding their head? That's sort of fascinating. One time I was doing a workout and my mom called me and I had to pick it up. And so my mom was asking me, so what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm in the middle of the workout. And my mom said, well, I could hear you sweating, right? So we can hear what's happening in the life of the other person on the other side of the phone as well. So allowing that space for the other person to let some guards down. And they do. If you are quiet, they will reveal things that otherwise you most likely wouldn't have been able to pick up. It's almost as if you tell to the other person that I see you, that I see you. In Zulu, and this is my final note, Janice, just so you know, in Zulu culture, it's South of Africa, the greeting between people is savubona, and it means, sort of, if we translate it into English, is I see you. And the response from another person may or may not be jabo savubona, which means that I see you too, which now gives two people permission to be in each other's energetic space and communicate with each other, to let each other into each other's lives. And I have shared this short little word, savubona, I see you, in my seminars. Fascinatingly enough, the feedback comes from parents with teenagers, that if in the middle of some big tantrum or blowout in the kitchen, let's say in the morning before getting to school bus, the parent all of a sudden pauses and tells to that teenager, I see you, how it just sucks the wind out of the whole fight. So with that, I would like to be done with the official part, and I would like to tell you, everybody, I see you. Do we have any questions?
We can now take questions from everyone. As the host, may I take the initiative? I loved your program. Derek Arden keeps raving about your backstory. So I would, one, like to know, when did you learn English? Because you're more articulate than most of us. And two, how did you get to America?
That's a great question, Patricia. I started learning English when I was 11 years old. So that was at some point in the 80s, and English was not a popular language. The majority of the people in the Soviet Union would start learning German. That would be the third language everybody would start learning. But my family was always very anti-Soviet Union and pro-West. And already in the 80s, my parents were, listen, it has to be English because we think that in the future, it will be more beneficial to you. And I came to the United States because I got a scholarship in 2005 to a university in Savannah, Georgia. So I did my master's degree in the United States. And I studied the Atlantic slave trade. I did a lot of my research in England, in Manchester, and then Kingston upon Hull. They have a big, you would think that this is the last place in England to have the archives for the Atlantic slave trade, but that's where they have the archives. And I stayed, I met the boy, and well, here I am. That was not the plan.
This is it. The men mess up the plan.
They do.
So I invite you to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. You are all muted, but you know how to unmute yourself. And Derek, do you have a birthday question, seeing you are the one who raves about our speaker so much?
Well, when you and I spoke in New Mexico at the National Speaking Association's conference, Eva looked after us so well that I connected with her and we became friends. And Eva's appeared on my show 3 times. But the curious thing I think about Eva is learning a little bit about Estonia. And if you praise an Estonian, they can't handle it, which is the biggest thing that I surprised. And Eva will probably explain this, but I can't handle that. I'm an Estonian. So that's the first question. And the second one is, Eva's grandmother has never left her little tiny village in the middle of Estonia. And they're really worried about Eva being in the big wide world. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that, Eva?
Yes, which question first, Derek?
I can't even remember the first one. Eva,
the first one was that it's difficult to accept compliments. Estonians don't compliment each other. It's not part of a cultural habit. We just don't say positive things. And in general, this has been my experience coming from Eastern Europe. Maybe it's because of the Soviet Union, but we're really good at hiding positive emotions, not so good at hiding negative emotions. Americans are the reverse. They're really good at hiding the negative thoughts and emotions, but they are way more outgoing and generous with their praise and positivity. But yes, I have had to learn that if somebody says something nice about you, the least you can do is say thank you, because I'm sort of shocked. And to recondition myself, it's taking time. But my grandmother, yes, I have family who's been living in the same village on my father's side for 800 years. That's how long we can trace it back. And that's because when the Crusaders brought churches into Estonia, they started writing things down. How long they have lived in that village, I have no idea. And so like a couple of years ago already, my uncles and my grandmother started saying that, so when is this American project over? It's time to move back.
Right. Now, as a speaker, and we have many speakers on this call, we live for the applause. You mean, are you the only one of us that had to get to enjoy that?
It's just a little bit uncomfortable, so I don't really know what to do. So my first thought is like, how can I leave really fast? But yeah, no, I enjoy applause as well. And please feel free to say positive things. That's not what I'm trying to say here.
Tricia, I have
All
a
right.
question, if I might.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier, and Eva, I'm not sure you were on, that I have a friend in Tallinn that I obviously am very worried about. But
Yes.
when I have spoken with him or communicated with him via email, he says that Ukraine is 1,000 miles away from Tallinn, and we're not worried about this in our world right now. Do you share that view, or do you think people that live in Estonia should be worried about what Vladdy's up to?
It's interesting. I spoke to my family, to the younger generation just recently, and somebody made a very, very observant comment, in my opinion, that the women started getting worried about it before Putin or even started bombing Ukraine. And it has taken men a little bit to actually catch up that this is the reality. And of course, the refugees coming into Estonia are helping with that. Let's don't make any mistakes about it. Refugees are not easy to incorporate into a society. They are very traumatized to begin with. They have PTSD, all of them. These are women and children. They have their own baggage from their own lives in their own countries. And now you put them into a very unfamiliar situation. Estonian language is very different from Ukrainian, and not a lot of people speak Russian anymore. English is the more common language, second language in Estonia these days. And there are already tensions brewing in all the countries that are accepting refugees. It's not as easy to take them in. But I know that in most Eastern European countries that are accepting refugees en masse, West as well, police is actively scanning the internet sites to take down negative comments about Ukrainians. It's difficult. I'll give an example. What are the problems that are popping up? Like, public urination. And we have the loud and unruly behavior, fist fights. And these come with any sort of disruption in a community. But it's a challenging time. And I think all the countries the societies are starting to kind of get off balance a little bit. The balance is disrupted in those countries for sure. And the hard part is, Rick, that we don't know how long it's going to last. Every war has started, at least over the last 200 years. I can't say every war, but it's going to be over in a couple of weeks. First World War was going to be over in 3 months. That was the max. It lasted 4 years. The same was going to be for World War II. Hitler's plan was to go take Poland. He secretly was planning on going into Russia anyways, which Stalin was very well aware of, but it was going to be over really fast. Let's go to Poland. By Christmas, we're going to be in Moscow and it's all over. 5 years later, 2% of the world's population dead. So that's the scary part of any disruption at a large scale. Even the pandemic, if you think about it, it was going to be over by the end of the spring break, at least in the United States. Does anybody remember this? March, spring break at the end of March, April, we're all going to go back to normal. 2 years later, we're still wrestling with the virus. But as one Estonian writer very cleverly said at one time, he was commenting on World War II that it's not terrible that people do these horrors to each other. What's really terrible is that we get used to them. It becomes the new normal. And I hope it doesn't happen to Ukraine, that 3 months from now, we are like, oh yeah, there's some conflict in Ukraine.
You are you are wonderfully articulate, very impressive. Now, in a few minutes, what I will do is I will stop the recording and we can stay and chat. If you are finished with your PowerPoint, I will take off the co-host and rights and give them back to Craig. But before I turn off the recording, not close the meeting, do you have any concluding thoughts about your communication and negotiation content?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's always safe to approach other people with a little bit of caution and a little bit of kindness. And some days you can't do it. We all have our own triggers. And if you do become that level 1 negotiator who brings the drama, or maybe you're level 2, you react to someone else's drama, then you need to have a lot of compassion for yourself. Not all days are brothers, and sometimes we just don't have the strength in our legs to carry on as the best versions of ourselves. But I think a little bit of compassion goes a long way towards yourself and towards others.
Thank you. Accept our applause.